Yeah, it's funny because people have a very visceral reaction when you say something that flies against the marital norm. Before my ex and I broke up, we did this thing we used to joke called parenting like you're divorced, or taking turns being a 1950s husband. And what we would do, and it actually saved our marriage for another year, was we would take turns being the husband. So we would come home for 1 week. I would be the husband, and he would plan the meals and clean the house and do the child work and childcare, and I would get to come in and have a drink and talk about my day. And then the week after, we would swap. And we thought this was revelatory because it actually brought a lot of attraction back to our relationship, because we were sharing the load so equitably, or the labor. And so we would tell our married friends about this concept, and they would like stunned and angry, and they'd have these reactions like, that's not romantic. When I'm like, what's more romantic, me doing all the housework or me not? So it's just, I can really get it. Really, when you say that about people being mad at the leave your husband theory, I'm like, okay, yeah, people don't like having,
I think,
this concept put towards them.
No. I think people don't like having the reality of their humiliations, whether large or small, broadcast in a way that makes it clear they're not okay, which is what sort of underpins, I think, all of the, the TikTok marriage humor, comedy reels, people making fun of married life in this way that is always defensible to them, where they say, well, it's just a joke, we're just having fun. And you're like, well, your joke is that your marriage sucks. Your joke is that you hate each other. Your joke is that you, particularly for the men, your joke is that you hate your wife and children, and you'll do everything you can to exploit them. Like, I'm literally just explaining the joke back to you, and you're angry about it. Because I think when you put a mirror up to it and you say the mirror is refusing to reflect the gloss and the sparkles that you're trying to pretend exist here, and the mirror is actually just showing you not even just reality as it is, but it's showing you the reality that you're presenting without all of those bells and whistles. And people get very upset by it. And I understand that. I'm not scathing of or disdainful towards women in particular who need to find some kind of humor to make the abyss of their misery seem okay, and make it also seem like this is what marriage is. This is what everyone has. This is what all women have. And therefore, if we all have it, then it's okay. It's normal. I think that patriarchy and patriarchal society has done such an incredible job of conditioning women to believe that marriage at all costs is what will fulfill their lives, but not just fulfill them, but elevate them. It elevates them into the status of human. It elevates them into the status of, someone who matters. And part of that is because, I reference Marilyn Fry in the book, who, if anyone is unfamiliar with Marilyn Fry, which is honestly probably most people because she's one of the lesser known second wave feminists, but she should be in everyone's house, on everyone's bookshelf, because she's incredible. She wrote a book of essays called The Politics of Reality that was published in 1983. And if you put it in people's hands right now and said this was published last year, they would think that checked out. It's that contemporary. But she says that men retain the right to author perception, and patriarchy has equipped men with the confidence and the entitlement to author reality. And so they set reality for themselves, and women are just kind of peripherally invited to join it. But we're only allowed to be in the reality if we firstly conform to the reality's demands and expectations of us, but also we pretend the reality is what we need and want. We pretend that this is ordained somehow by a higher way of being and not something that's been orchestrated by men to serve their needs. And so when you articulate arguments against marriage and you say that marriage is designed, not just historically and deliberately, so we can see this through the actual practical application of legislation and laws that were designed to oppress and exploit women, one of which, obviously, which I'm sure we'll get into talking about at some point, is coverture, which was a legal doctrine that for centuries dictated women had no identity outside of their husbands and fathers. That in fact, that's one of the reasons why women, and now, they say, well, it's a choice. But one of the reasons why women changed their names to that of their husband is because for centuries it was legally required of them. They had no identity of their own. Everything they owned belonged to their husband, having previously belonged to their father. So when you kind of like point out that this is a deliberate design whose purpose is to furnish patriarchy, to maintain patriarchy, and to maintain capitalism, to maintain white supremacy, which we can also talk about, and that women are really just the pawns in this, people are very uncomfortable with that because you're asking them to unlearn everything they know about the way that the world is. And you're asking women in particular to not just unlearn everything that they've been told about what it means to be a worthwhile woman, but to imagine a future for themselves in which their value comes from within and not from without, in which their value is defined and set by themselves without the qualification of a man's admiration or superficial love. And that is really unsettling for a lot of people because it requires a lot of courage to be able to live that kind of life. If you've been raised believing for your whole awareness, your whole identity, if you've been raised believing that you increase in value the more pleasing you are to the men around you, to deliberately step outside of that and reject that firstly means to become displeasing to most men. And that's just the reality. And to come to terms then with like, well, what do you do with this, with like a world in which men suddenly hate you now because you're valuing yourself first, when
going through that,
that's always been like a terrifying concept to you, So sorry,
yeah,
I talked for a long time and put a lot of different things in that. So I've thrown a ball at you. You pick up one.
Well, there's so many things to tangent off that. I had to make notes, but something I am struggling with since doing the pod and being more vocal about my disdain for traditional marriage is I find sometimes I struggle with a visceral feeling that I'm less attractive because I'm having these open discussions, and that is an ugly feeling. I talk about it with my sister all the time. I'm like, I'm on the apps, so I want to meet someone, but then if they go to my Instagram, it's all like, don't get married and stuff like that. And I'm like, it's just something that I struggle with, and I think that's hangovers.
Can I be brutally honest with you in a way that I hope will
be kind,
it offers
honest.
like a liberating lifeline? In the eyes of a lot of men, you are less attractive because of that. And that doesn't mean that you are fundamentally less attractive. It doesn't mean that your value has actually like decreased in any way. In fact, your value has gone up because you understand your value in yourself. You understand your worth and you understand what you want. And you're refusing, at this point in your life, you're refusing to be just a side character in some man's story. And you're refusing to conform to their wants and needs in order to superficially feel valuable in their eyes. But the reality is, and I think that this is something that understandably a lot of women struggle with, particularly if they believe themselves to be attracted to men. And I say that not as a joke, they believe themselves to be attracted to men. I say that because I think if women were truly to sit down and question what it is that they want and question what it is that they are attracted to. Yes, of course, there are like physical desires, and there is I'm attracted to both. Oh, well, I'm attracted to all people. But I have that thing where I'm like, why am I still attracted to men when mostly I kind of at best have just disregard for their, I don't know. I've gone through, I don't want to be like super dismissive of women. I do have male friends, but at a fundamental level, men just cannot understand what it's like to be a woman in the world. And even with my closest male friends, I've wrestled with the frustration and the fury of describing things to them and having them say back to me, yeah, but are you sure that that's what really happened? Are you sure that that's what they really mean? Or even just knowing in myself that Yeah, like knowing that I qualify and soften, still, even me, soften sometimes the things that I say so that the men present aren't somehow like impacted too badly by the reality of what it is that I'm saying. So when I say like women who believe themselves to be attracted to men, I'm curious in a sort of a philosophical way, I guess. And this is for all people as well. If we were to exist outside of the conditioning of the world and outside of the value system that we've been kind of indoctrinated into, how many of us would be like, well, I think I'm actually just attracted to the kind of stability and the power that offers, because to be a partnered woman who is partnered with a man, one of the reasons why it's so scary for a lot of women to break free of that is because of the stigma of not having that. That if you are married or if you're in a long-term domestic partnership, or even if you've got a boyfriend, there's like some kind of sense of, oh, thank God, finally, I'm a woman who has value in the world. I can rest easy because someone has picked me. And that might be too reductive, but I do think that on some fundamental level, that is operating all the time. And the financial burden aside, which is very, very real, of leaving a partnership when you've got children, the financial burden aside from that, a lot of the reason that women are scared to do it is because they feel, and I've heard them say it, who's going to want me now? Who's going to want me now? And I really feel like sort of a mix of fury and depression and sadness that firstly, like some of the most amazing people in the world, and I think that they're amazing because they've created life and they've raised life. And I'm not saying that you have to do those things to be amazing, but I think that those things are an amazing thing to do. And they're, sort of roundly dismissed. Everyone sort of says, oh, well, we revere mothers, but it's like, we don't. We revere women who conform to patriarchy and capitalism. We don't revere mothers. If we revered mothers, we'd revere single mothers. We'd revere poor mothers. We'd revere mothers who are out there working to like put food on the table. But society only pretends to revere women who conform to the role of like nuclear family mother. And that is a very different thing from revering motherhood. So when you say, I'm worried that like men who kind of see my political ferocity, that it makes me less attractive. Yes, it does. To them, not in reality though. It is a bitter pill to swallow, but I think it's important to swallow it and to really embody it, because it also works to unpick a lot of that fairy tale bullshit that we've been raised with, that if I just try hard enough, then I'll find the one. They're out there somewhere. My soulmate is out there. I want real, true, deep love. Of course, like real, true, deep love is fundamentally life-changing. Most people in history have not had it. Most people in history have just kind of trucked along. Even historically, most married people, if they've had like a true, deep love, it's been outside of their marriage. Because marriage and love are two very separate things. So I feel like one of the most important things that women can do is to really work hard, and it's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen, to really work hard at unpicking this belief that somehow that person is out there and we need to find them in order to have true happiness, because it is poisoned our fucking brains. And it's made us fundamentally unhappy.
Well, then I have a theory that capitalism actually needs us to be unhappy. So we go shopping and keeps the economy going. But that's a totally separate conspiracy. Yeah. So one of my favorite lines in your book.
It's actually not separate. Like it's sorry, just quickly. You're spot on. It's not separate at all. It's all intertwined. Everything about like what we need to do in order to be a productive, happy member of society, a conformist member of society, is all stitched into that.
Well, I'm jumping around here, but one of the most like amazing lines in your book that just sledgehammered me was, capitalism needs women to have babies, but if we recognize this work, then it means it has an economic value, which gives women bargaining power. And that blew my mind. Were there other, I guess, were there other moments in the book or in your research that blew your mind?
I'm really glad that you asked that question, because I really wanted to talk about the economics, and so you've provided the perfect segue into that. Just to answer the second bit of that, this, the blowing of the mind. I came to this book thinking falsely, incorrectly, not so much arrogantly, but just with ignorance, that I pretty much knew the topic. I knew my position on it first and foremost, which was that marriage, I think, fundamentally makes women unhappy, and that we're aspiring to the wrong things. And that if you peel back even the sort of the surface level of any kind of mothers group online, you will see the deep wells of misery and exploitation that are occurring all over the, houses across the country, across the world. But I didn't really think that there was much more for me to learn than that, which makes me, I'm admitting that now, because I think we should all admit when we don't know. We should all admit when we discover, to our own kind of chagrin, that we are not as well informed as we thought we were. Because what I learned throughout writing this book, it didn't fundamentally change my beliefs at all. In fact, it just compounded them. But it gave me really specific incidents throughout history and really specific movements to be able to articulate the arguments in a much stronger way. And that, to me, was such a beautiful experience in writing it, because one of the things that I love to do while writing a book or kind of prosecuting any argument, I guess, is to tell the ethos I've always gone with is tell people something they don't know about something they thought they did. So people think they know about marriage. I thought I knew about marriage, but you've got to learn way more so that you more deeply understand the issue. And I want, really, with women in particular who read this book, although of course I would love for men to read it as well, not because I desperately need their approval, but because they need to understand that this system is an illusion as well. But one of the things that I really hope that they kind of get out of it is that it's not just, I'm sure that there are lots of people who will kind of go, oh, that's just her marriage hating book, that's just her man bashing book, which is what is said about so many of my works. Or even that that they might pick it up and think that this will just confirm what they feel about their own contemporary place in marriage. But actually what it gives, I think, is a really solid foundation of how we've ended up at this point, where people love to say things like, well, feminism is over. We've got all the equality now. I mean, obviously that's bullshit. But also, we're not, if women have the most liberated kind of access to power that we've ever had at any point in history, which is not, I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think people think that that's true, but I think that we can't really know that unless we had access to every single kind of historical context and every cultural context. But say that is true, then why is it that so many of us are still choosing to sign up to an archaic institution that was fundamentally built out of viewing us as property, that fundamentally worked to oppress us and steal our industry from us, steal our assets from us, turn us into broodmares, steal our children from us, and that at one point in history made it so easy for the men who were exploiting us in all those ways to institutionalize us once we became useless to them or once they wanted to move on with other people. And that didn't happen to all women, but it happened to enough women that we should be fundamentally fucking angry about it. In Victoria alone, in the 20th century, there were more than 1,000 women who were committed to asylums. In Victoria, Australia, more than 1,000 women. And some of them for things like postnatal depression, and they spent the rest of their lives forgotten and alone, essentially being emotionally tortured in asylums because husbands institutionalized them. How are we supposedly so liberated and free now, and women are still saying things like, well, it's my choice to take my husband's name? Okay, is it? Is it really? If it was really a choice, why aren't an equal number of men taking women's names? Or is it something that you say to yourself is a choice because in part you believe that it looks romantic to the outside world for you to have a single family name, but also you know he will never change his. It's not important to him to have the same last name as you. It's important that you have the same last name as him. It's important, especially, that his children have his name branded on them, even though he hasn't done anything in the growing of those children. He's likely to not really do much in the way of the initial care of those children. And he's certainly not going to be the one who's suffering pelvic prolapse because of the birthing of those children. And yet he needs to have them with his name. And she, and you hear this so often, women saying this, I wanted to have the same last name as my children. And that's why I changed my name to his. It's this acceptance that that's just the way that things are. And I think that when women start to realize, I actually do have, I'm saying that I chose to do it, but actually I do have a real choice in the matter. And my choice could be that, no, I birthed those children. I'm giving them my name. If it's really important to you that we have a single family name, you can change yours to mine. And that will be the test of what he really thinks of you. It's that thing of when you say, like, if you want to know how men really view women, don't see how they respond when women are nice to them. See how they respond when women are outraged. See how they respond when women challenge them. So that's kind of like what I want people to get from the book. But in terms of the economics, which the book also goes into a lot, part of that, going back to Marilyn Frye and her theory that men author perception and they create reality for themselves. One of the ways that men throughout history have done that, and I should be, I sort of refer to men as a class, but I should be more specific as well and say that this is whiteness, it's privilege, it's economic power. So it's been a specific kind of man who's been able to do that. And it's a white, educated because, you know, higher education was only accessible to white men of a certain class bracket. So the men who have created and organized things carefully to not only give them the most access to society, but also to define professionalism and expertise as being only accessible to them, have then been able to assert themselves. Well, we're the experts. It's like the chicken and egg thing. What came first? Men deciding they were the only ones allowed to be the experts, or men, because they're experts, saying, well, only men can be experts. So anyway, men have orchestrated it so that they get to be the definers of reality and the creators of society. So in the book, I talk about the idea of the father of and the assertion of male expertise in areas where there's actually really no fundamental evidence or proof of what these men are often saying. It's just their own theory of what feels correct to them. And every woman listening to this will have an experience of listening to a contemporary modern man, a peer maybe even, just saying something as fact when actually if you strip it away, you're like, that's no, that's just what you feel to be true. You feel it to be true that men built the world, and therefore you state it as a fact. But the only reason that men are able to state so confidently that men built the world, in quotation marks, is because men have, as I said, organized it so that they can be the ones in the positions of power. And they've completely invisibilized women and any marginalized groups that have had any fundamental role in that. And economics is a really good example of that. I'm reading a book at the moment called Her Story of Economics by Edith Kuiper, and it's all about the it's all about the women economists and the women who wrote about economics. And she makes that distinction very clearly because she said for so much of history, women were only able to write about economics rather than being defined as women economics because they weren't entitled to higher education, so they couldn't join the academies. So she's sort of writing about all of these women who've been erased in history. And she mentions Adam Smith, he was an 18th century economist. He wrote The Wealth of Nations and The Theory of Moral. Let me just get that exact title for you. Might just have to edit out this little brain fart from me. So Adam Smith wrote An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, which is sometimes just referred to as the Wealth of Nations. And he also wrote a book of theory about morality. Adam Smith is quite often referred to as the father of economics, in the same way that Aristotle is referred to as the father of logic and the father of Western civilization, the same way that Hippocrates is referred to as the father of medicine, and Charles Darwin, the father of evolution. All of these men who are the father of something, because to be a mother is like meaningless and bullshit. That doesn't do anything to contribute to the world. To be a father, that builds the world. So Adam Smith, the father of economics, he wrote the blueprint essentially to the modern political economy system and how people understood it. And he just decided that women weren't a part of it. He just decided that they weren't relevant to it. And so then we became irrelevant to it. It doesn't matter that there were women who were writing about economics. It doesn't matter that women have fundamentally built economies, not just in terms of production and labor. Like I think I mentioned in the book somewhere, and if I didn't, it got lost in the drafts and I'll put it in something else. But one of the biggest export industries in America, one of the things that built modern America in a capitalist sense, was the textile industry that was predominantly staffed by teenage girls who wanted to, like, some kind of economic agency. Now, I'm not saying they were rich. It wasn't like they went out and worked in the factories and built their own little nest eggs, but they had some financial independence away from their families. Those girls were a huge contributing factor to building America's economy. And they have also been erased in terms of what it means to have built the world. The erasure of women in the domestic space is also deliberate. So in the Industrial Revolution, the shift from pre-Industrial Revolution, and look, I know I'm kind of going off on economic tangents here and stuff, but it's all very relevant to marriage. Pre-Industrial Revolution, most couples worked together in the home. The home was a site of actual productivity and labor, and people would, like farmers would work together. So this idea as well that somehow second wave feminism created work for women and destroyed our lives, it's just historically inaccurate and also just bullshit. Women always worked. The Industrial Revolution essentially changed the marketplace. So the advent of factories meant that people left home to go and work in the factories, and most of those people who left home were poor unmarried women, men, and like the working class and people of color. Middle class white women in particular suddenly were relegated to the home sphere. And they weren't just relegated to the domestic sphere that they'd always been in and able to continue doing all the work that had always been kind of their realm. They suddenly were not even allowed to do that work. So this is also why, like, so many women, essentially the same way that they would 100 years later in the 1960s develop Valium addictions, a century before that, developed laudanum addictions, and doctors were prescribing them with opiates because they were just so fucking bored. So around this time, there was a huge influx of women in that class bracket writing about home economics. And when you hear the words home economics, you think, oh, that's just like boring, meaningless, like shitty sewing classes that they teach you at school, where sewing and cooking, blah, blah, because that's, of course, how feminized industries get reduced to these like nothing markets, right? So all these women were writing about home economics. But in doing so, what they were reflecting was that women had a deep understanding of the economics of how to run a household, and households were still a site of like production. Households were still a site of producing workers, of producing food, of producing labor in this way. But none of it meant anything because women were the ones who were the experts in it suddenly. And when women become experts in something, that field is minimized and devalued because anything women could be experts in is obviously stupid bullshit. So the economics of women having children is again dismissed as being like, well, that's just, that's your, firstly, we're told it's your natural inclination to have children. That's your biological nurture coming through. And if you don't, then you'll fundamentally have missed out on some deep, meaningful lesson in life. You'll be like an empty half person. You'll be a shell with your like dried up old womb that's never been used. So therefore, what purpose do you have? You haven't even produced a child for someone. And yet at the same time, it's like, well, it's not important. Nothing of what you do is important. Anyone can do it. Women do it every day. It's bullshit. It doesn't matter that like if you're talking about like building the world, it is women fundamentally who have built society by producing people to be in society, by feeding people, by caring. It's like this, like, you know, the myth of protection as well. And I've got a whole chapter about protection in the book. But men say, well, we protect you, we provide for you and protect for you, and therefore you owe us everything. You owe us your bodies, you owe us your labor, you owe us your love and devotion. You owe it to us to not let us be lonely because we put a roof over your head. Like, firstly, no, you're putting a roof over your head and you're using that as a bargaining chip to get women to do everything for you. But secondly, even if that were true, it's because you've organized society to make it impossible for women to economically put a roof over their own fucking heads. So instead, we're trapped in these domestic cages where you get everything done for you because you feel like you've blessed women with the patronage of a room in your house. And obviously nothing that we do within that counts for anything. I'm sorry, I just talked for like 20 minutes and you have been unable to get a word in.
I've had to make notes because there's so many things, but that actually leads me to the book just as a topic, because something that's a big discourse at the moment on social media is the big divorce. There's a big divorce coming. Maybe it's driven by post-pandemic, or celebrities are leading the charge to big divorce. Why do you, and I think this ties to your economic angle, and women are more so than ever, you know, in charge of their economies only by one generation, though. We're not that far ahead. But what drove you? What was was it the zeitgeist that drove you to do the book? Like, do you feel in the energy of the room that this is happening?
I didn't write the book because I sat down and thought, what book will sell really well? But I knew that the book would, I don't know if it'll sell well. I hope it does. But I knew that the book was tapping into a moment because I was in that moment. I was feeling all of those things. I had, you know, I left my son's dad in 2019 and I underwent the same kind of like transformation that so many women do when they make that choice. And that was one where I suddenly realized how much happier I was outside of the relationship, how much more liberated, how much more myself I was, how I'd lost myself so much in, you know, performing service to not just to one single person, you know, but performing service to this role that I started to question, had I wanted any of that at all? Like, I'm glad I did it, obviously. And I have my son and I wouldn't give him up for the world. Like, I love him. But I think maybe what's become really apparent to me is that I really love being a mother, and I really didn't love being a wife. And to be clear, I was never married legally. I would never get married. But like, for all intents and purposes, when you're in a domestic partnership, you are fulfilling the role of the wife. And the wife is not something that people really have a lot of respect for, which is why people say things like, I need a wife. Because what they really mean is, I need a maid. I need a personal assistant. I need someone to take care of everything for me. And I need them to not be paid for it. Because if I have to pay them for it, then I have to put a value on that work. And I don't want to put a value on that work because I want them to just do it. Which is also what, you know, Edith Kuiper talks about in her History of Economics. She references Margaret Reed, who was a 19th century economist, who made a distinction between work in the home that could be outsourced, but that often wasn't, and work that was done for just personal care. So, for example, if you have a shower yourself, you're obviously indulging in personal care. If you do laundry, it's personal care as well because you want to wear clean clothes, but it's work that can be outsourced. So you can pay someone else to do it. But most often people don't, because most often the people who are doing it are women. And so this is why in a modern world, you have women saying things in mothers groups like, I really want to get a cleaner. I really want to hire a cleaner, but my husband won't let me. Why won't your husband let you? Because you do it for free. And he thinks it's his money. He thinks he's gone out there and worked for the money, despite the fact that actually the majority of mothers are working in paid employment as well. He thinks it's his money. And it's a waste of that money for you to pay someone else to do work that is so meaningless, apparently, that he's just got his wife doing it for free. He's not doing the work. She's doing it. So this idea that
It's
like
rage-inducing.
somehow, yeah, exactly. So the idea of the wife is one that by necessity, in order to get women to keep aspiring to it, by necessity has to have an illusion of gravitas. You know, like I've got a lot of epitaphs in the book, and I open one of the sections with a quote from Pride and Prejudice where, after Lydia Bennet has gotten disgracefully married to Mr. Wickham, and she says, "No, Jane, you must go lower, for I am a married woman." And that's the thing. It's like, I am a married woman. I have status and gravitas in society. Behind closed doors, I probably am treated like shit. But in the world, I'm a wife. And that gives me some kind of kudos and credit. So we have to like frame the wife as being this aspirational role that women want to become one in order to have value, in order to feel chosen, in order to feel like men with all of their incredibly discerning tastes. Sarcastically, she says, that somehow I am special because he chose me of all women to be his wife. And then on the other hand, wives have to be completely reduced to unpaid maids and broodmares whose value is economically meaningless because what they're doing is love. And if you put a price on it, then that would be devaluing it. So it's a very cleverly organized system that has enabled patriarchy and capitalism and white supremacy to continue having women sign up to this role that keeps men thrust out into the world, being able to move further and further into the frontiers, like dominating. And I think I say in the book somewhere, this, that women are expected to be the trampolines on which men bounce higher and higher, soaring to new heights and seeing more of the world, while women just like are there to catch them and bounce them up. And that's the role that we're supposed to be happy to have, that we're grateful for. I wouldn't want to go out and do all of that work. I don't want to work. I want to be taken care of. You're not being taken care of, for a start, and you're not a child. So don't ever fall into this is the thing. You mentioned the big divorce. Let's just mention a big divorce that's happening at the moment. Hugh Jackman and Deborah Lee Furness. Now, I don't know any of the details of that divorce. I say that if they've come to the point, after however many years together, 30 years together, they've come to the point where they've decided to go their separate ways, or to end their romantic relationship and shift into whatever new version of it. Fucking good on them. Congratulations. That's amazing. Maybe there was a terrible fallout, in which case, again, congratulations. You've decided to not struggle through. But this idea that somehow, if a relationship ends, it's failed. It's a failure. Oh, another failed relationship. Like, I never think of my relationship as being a failure because, firstly, we loved each other for a number of years. Secondly, I, through that relationship, met the love of my life, which is my child. Not all women feel that way about their children. That's fine. That's how I feel about my son. At this point, the absolute love of my life. Someone who just brings me such joy that how could that be a failed relationship when it led to that? And thirdly, that it's a successful co-parenting relationship and friendship now because we put aside the toxicity of the fallout of the relationship, and we committed equally to raising our child with respect and love for each other. We spend time together as a family. We put his needs first. That is, to me, fundamentally more successful than many marriages that are still in operation. And also,
that's why
the idea
my mind.
that somehow,
why can't we have that in marriage?
Well, we can. We just have to reframe how we think about things. And this is kind of like the really frightening underbelly of that, is that a lot of women see exactly who they married when that marriage ends. And that's what's really scary. And it's not just it's not just a case of, well, you know, people in demonstrably coercive and abusive relationships have it much, you know, it's not as easy as just leaving. Of course, when we talk about just leave unhappy situations, we don't mean just leave abusive situations, because you need support to be able to do that, because it is dangerous and scary. That's a separate issue, but also one that speaks to the absolute fucking risk of partnering in these ways. That marriage is like a ludicrous mental illness when you think about it, because it's calling on women to invite into their beds their biggest natural predator and to be happy about it and to aspire to it. That's insanity. But also that if your relationship ends and suddenly you realize that the person you stood across, I mean, no woman leaves a marriage, or no woman is battling it out with like a toxic ex who is, you know, poisoning her children against her, or even repartners immediately to get some other woman lined up to do all the work for him, or says horrible things to her, or even like before the marriage ends or the relationship ends, just treats her like a fucking appliance that needs to service and do everything for him. No woman thinks on her wedding day, yeah, that's what's going to happen to me. They all think, because this is the conditioning, this is the fairy tale lie, this is the deliberate project of it, they all think, I found my one. I found the one that is going to make my life better, that is going to give me value, that is going to make it easy from this point. I don't have to worry now because I found him. Now I can just relax. And actually, they realize that the day after the wedding is when the real work starts. And the day after the wedding is when the real work ends for him.
Yeah. And it's
you know, even Deborah Lee Furness and Hugh Jackman mentioning them, like for 30 years, people were like, well, they're Hollywood's, you know, that's the goal, couple goals. They've been together for so long. Even their relationship ended. So everyone needs to be smarter about these things and to understand that unless you are part of the very, very rare group of people who can truly say we loved each other equally and respectfully for our entire lives, and I never wanted anything with anyone else. Because even then, like, if you love someone truly, you must have moments where you're like, oh, I feel like I'd love to like explore. I mean, obviously, like, an open relationship is a totally separate thing that people should open themselves up to. But unless you can say that, mostly what you're really signing up to is an illusion, and it's a pretense. And so you have to be more practical about it. You would never sit down with an employer or a potential employer and tolerate or even entertain them saying, I think you should come work for me. Oh, let's start a business together. Oh my God, like, it would be so fun. It's going to be so amazing. I am so committed to you and this business. No, we don't need to get any lawyers involved. That's so unromantic. Are you not like committed to the business idea? You're not committed to why are you asking me about how much money you're going to be paid? That feels very unemotional to me. Like, why would you even ask that? It doesn't feel like you're really committed to this. It's calculated. You're a gold digger. Like, why are you asking those questions? We would never approach a contractual like arrangement like that with this kind of pie-eyed sort of just throw caution to the wind that we do with romantic relationships. Whereas the romantic relationship being codified and enshrined by law is the one we need to have protections in most of all, because it's the one which is so much harder to leave. You can quit a job and you're not going to be sued for it, mostly. But to enter into a relationship, whether it's de facto or a marriage, and not have systems in place that protect you or both of you, that certainly protect any children that might arise out of the scenario, that protect your assets, but that also recognize through like codifying that relationship legally, that you are also having discussions about what you want it to look like. Like, how many people get married and then have children only to sort of realize that their husbands fundamentally don't agree with them on how to raise those kids. I've seen so many mothers in mothers groups wrestling with men who, you know, want to kind of inflict really outdated ideas of masculinity on little boys and are sexist troglodytes when it comes to women, and yet are raising girls. Like, you need to know what your partner's moral values are when it comes to children before you have a child with them. Don't just go in with a blindfold on and go, it'll be fine, because mostly it won't be. And I think as well, one thing that women don't realize, which you will definitely like relate to, is that the sort of theoretical, ideological projection of how you think you're going to be a mother to a child it can never fully embody what happens when you actually birth, like grow and birth a child, regardless of how you felt about that child at the moment of its birth, regardless of how difficult you find parenting the child. You cannot ever predict the grip of primality that comes over you. And the romantic fantasy that you might have about, and I write about this in the book as well, the romantic fantasy that you might have about looking at a man and thinking, I can't wait to have a baby with you. Seeing you seeing you be a father is going to make me love you so much more. And there's a sort of like kind of an understanding in the woman that it will be reciprocal, that seeing her become a mother will make him love her so much more. And often that's not the case. Often it makes him annoyed because she's giving attention to someone else. And in her case, this child comes along and she's suddenly like, man, what the fuck? Who gives a shit about him? He's just some lump in my house that's not helping. And I'm tired and my body hurts and this child needs me to keep it alive and he is letting me down. And all of that romantic fantasy is suddenly stripped away, and all you're left with is a betrayal that in your most vulnerable moment, in your moment of need, the person who said that they would support you and love you and take care of you, and that you are told by all of society around you will protect you and provide for you, is not there and has no interest in showing up. That's the betrayal that so many women experience. And then they feel embarrassed by it, of course, because they don't realize that every other woman is going through it necessarily. And they also feel humiliated on a fundamental level because it is humiliating. It is humiliating to have done something so profound and incredible, so physically demanding, to have gone to parts of yourself physically and emotionally and spiritually even that you did not know how you would return from. And to have someone look at it and go, meh, that's humiliating.
Yeah.
So of course, like a lot of us, end up for years sometimes just swallowing the daily humiliations, sucking it up until eventually we don't think we do deserve any better. Because that's just how it's
is. It's like Mia Friedman said in her podcast. I won't include this in the interview, but she goes, what's in a tolerable level of uncomfortable?
You can include it.
Yeah. When she said in her recent podcast app, and they were talking about your book, and she's like, well, she's telling everyone to leave their husband. What's a tolerable level of uncomfortableness? Like, shouldn't we all just tolerate the uncomfortableness of marriage?
I mean, look, if you want your life to be one about tolerating discomfort so that you can stay married, I probably can't help you. That is your choice to some degree, I guess. But my personal value system and my personal view is for myself, and certainly for other women, want more for us than tolerating discomfort just to stay married. I want us to challenge society to be better. I want us to role model to other women and to younger women in particular what it can and does look like to live outside of that model. And I want to be happy. Like, even if you take away any of the kind of like moral sort of like, puffing out my chest, I just fucking want to be happy. I don't want to tolerate discomfort so that I can say to the world, I'm a married woman. I would rather die, I think. And in fact, I know that sounds hyperbolic, but towards the end of my relationship. And I say this with no shade on my son's dad, because he is truly a wonderful person and really, like, as a father, so much better than most men I know and hear about, and really truly committed to his child and very supportive of me, even in a especially I think in a post separation, because I can no longer be taken for granted. I have to actually be met as a person. And he's risen to that challenge, and I feel that respect from him now. But I did feel towards the end, I don't know how I can live my life like this. I felt such crushing suffocation and misery and doom. I mean, yeah, sure, like if you want to tolerate discomfort, go for it. But there's no prize at the end for who's suffered the most.
That's really
But listen,
powerful.
look, not to go too much into a kind of like, I was going to say, not to go too much into a sort of what people I'm sure will say, well, that's just a personal feud or whatever. There's lots of things that Mia Friedman has done that I've really admired. I wrote to her during the pandemic about an episode that she did on her podcast about vaccines, and I thought it was excellent. I really respected the work that she was doing around that. And then there are other things that I don't respect and that I've questioned, and responses to things that I feel at this point in her career, it's strange to me that there is sometimes an unwillingness to reflect. And perhaps that's just a mindset that not just her, but other people maybe in that mindset as well share, which is that just to control the narrative. Don't reflect, don't apologize, just control the narrative. And I feel it just doesn't, it's not how I approach things. And so that's fine. We're just very different people in that regard. But I do think with that kind of, I've sort of kind of meanly called them the prom committee on Instagram, because it does feel like an exclusive clique that everyone around is meant to like look at and gush over and want to be a part of, but you're never really allowed to be inside the room. And I just find that kind of gross and uninteresting. But I do feel like there's a fetishization of marriage, and there's this sort of the couple goals thing, that if you're a married person, I don't know, it just makes me think of Tanya Degano from Muriel's Wedding, when Rhonda says to her, "How are you?" And she's like, "Married." It's like, cool. Wow, you got married. Amazing achievement.
Yep.
I just feel like the way that I've had some interactions with people in that clique where they get really upset when I question that fetishization and suggest that I'm being like really mean and I'm bullying these women. And it's like, I'm not. I've never bullied a woman for getting married. I mean, I'm not a bully. Some people would disagree with that. I've never bullied a woman for getting married. I have questioned women, particularly who have an extraordinary amount of privilege, who are showcasing a level of economic and financial ostentatious, like, indulgence in a way that I think contributes really dangerously to the idea that marriage will elevate your life. And that's what I reserve my critique for.
Yep. Do you think she'll read your book?
I think she will, actually, because I think that regardless of our disagreements, I think that Mia does have a curiosity about other. I think that she will want to equip herself with knowing what my arguments are if she is going to disagree with them. And I respect that.
Gotta respect that, I guess. That part. Just doing a research, I suppose. Well, Clem, it's so frustrating because there's so many moments in this conversation that almost brought me to tears or almost made me angry, and I've wanted to I feel like I could talk to you for hours, for days, forever, but I'm mindful of both our schedules. So I wanted to end with just one question, and it's pretty simple, or it might be hard.
Mm-hmm.
Are you optimistic about love or marriage? Or are you optimistic
me
for
personally?
marriage? Yeah. After writing the book.
Do you mean as an institution or for me personally?
Well, I think as an institute, there are going to be people reading the book, I think, who are currently married and maybe want to see a way to
Yeah, no doubt.
have an optimistic vision for where they're at.
Mm. Well, I am really sorry to disappoint those people because I am not optimistic for marriage as an institution. And what I mean by that is not that I think that fundamentally their relationships are doomed. Love is very different to marriage. Love and commitment is not the same thing as marriage. You can be committed to someone and you can love them and not invite the whole world to qualify your relationship by joining an institution that has literally billions of women and their heads. Let me say that again. You can be in love with someone, you can commit to a relationship with them, you can grow a life together respectfully and kindly, and always with the knowledge that if one of you stops behaving that way, that the other one can leave. You can do that without signing up to an institution that has legally fucked women, that has been deliberately designed with men's needs in mind and not women's, that has isolated and marginalized women throughout all of history who did not sign up to it, who, despite this, as we were saying before, despite all this so-called reverence for mothers, that the institution was used to delegitimize children, to call children born outside of wedlock illegitimate, to delegitimize humans, and to, as a result, marginalize their mothers and cast them out, that has economically drained women, that has made it impossible throughout recent history for women to gain any kind of economic independence, so that if they failed to find a husband, which, marriage rates have ebbed and flowed, and it hasn't always been because women have chosen not to do it. It's because, just as now, there is not always an option for every woman. And without options to economically bolster her life through marriage, and without options to academically or, even in terms of the labor force, improve her options, what are women meant to do that has driven women into poverty, both in and outside of marriage, and that has throughout history literally claimed billions of women to it through death, through, as I said, through poverty, through institutionalization, through the death in childbirth. I'll tell you this great story that's in a history of economics. One of the things, going back to that idea of what women have contributed to the world, particularly in terms of domestic, the domestic space that has been minimized, is all of these men throughout history, these bourgeois men who have closed ranks on who was able to access a formal education, who was able to be defined as a professional. It was the nobility in the Middle Ages that created the idea of a profession, because a profession could then be something that served the ruling class as opposed to something that served the workers. So all of these women in the middle class, yes, the middle and upper class and the aristocracy, who hosted salons in their houses, who hosted dinner parties featuring, philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau and, even Adam Smith, the economist, who invited these ideas into their homes because they were intellectually switched on and they were fascinated and they had their own skill set that were ignored. And they kind of created these places where these ideas could be discussed. And then the men went back to the academies and the universities and shared these ideas without any reference to the women who had created space for them to be, indulged, and who had also contributed their own ideas and contributed their own questions to it. And one of those women was called Emily de Chavannes. I've made my notes. One of those women was a French woman called Emily du Châtelet, and she was, for a time, Voltaire's, well, I should rephrase that. For a time, Voltaire was her lover. She was an aristocratic French woman. She was a philosopher, a mathematician. She hosted salons. She was a deep thinker. She also wrote about moral ethics, and she translated a number of really important, quote unquote, important philosophical texts from English into French, adding her own thoughts, by the way, which were considered to be some of the most profound writings on these things. She was this enormous figure, and she had agreed to translate a book of moral theory, and the deadline on it was really, really tight because, and this is crazy, because she was pregnant with her second child, and she knew, because of what her doctor had told her, that she was unlikely to survive the childbirth. And so she raced to finish the translation of this text. She finished it days before she went into labor and died in childbirth. I mean, you could extrapolate out of that and go and talk about the lack of abortion access, obviously, the lack of reproductive care, but also so much a part of what I go into in the book historically, which is also playing out still now, is the way in which marriage and the domestic oppression of women has been fundamentally about controlling our wombs and our reproductive systems. So it's been about childbirth. Back to the ancient Greek philosophers who talked about women's wombs wandering around our bodies. Any malady, I mean, you have PMDD. I think I've got PMDD. Any malady that could be associated with women's emotional spectrums, rage, even excessive bleeding, whatever it might be, sexual desires, was all related back to the womb. Oh, it's because the womb is either too dry or too flooded, so she needs to be married and fill it with babies. Because you can't be not married and fill it with babies, because then they're illegitimate children, right? So everything is about controlling the womb. So you've got then these women throughout history, and the only reason we know about Emily du Châtelet is because she was wealthy. How many other women doing incredible things, dying in childbirth? Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women, Mary Shelley's mother, who contributed so much to, 18th century feminist thought, dying in childbirth while birthing Mary Shelley. The reality of women's labor and pain that has been dictated largely by service to marriage and service to men. To me, I think when you ask a question like, are you optimistic for marriage? I cannot be optimistic for an institution that has killed so many women. And I cannot be optimistic that we still live in a world where so many women are willing to overlook that because they feel like it's romantic to be a part of it, because they've been conditioned to believe that it's romantic. None of that is to say that you can't fall in love, that you can't form respectful relationships, even with men. I mean, good luck to you. But marriage doesn't have to be it. And question why it is so important that you join that institution. Question what it is you feel other people will see in you by being a wife, by having a ring on your finger, and really challenge yourself to go deep and to be honest with yourself about what it is you think you're gaining by that. And if you still want to do it, fine, but go into it with your eyes open and make sure you've got protections in place. Make sure you always have enough money to leave. Make sure that you have an out clause. And if your answer to that as well, I want to have a family, I want to build something together, question why it is in society we're not allowed to do that outside of romantic, mostly heterosexual scenarios. Why can't friends marry each other? Why can't Megan, you and I legally bond ourselves together and build an empire together? Because love and marriage, companionate marriages as they're called, they're only 200 years old, historically. Prior to that, marriage was all about empire building, and it was about the aggregation of money and wealth and land. We could have that system. That is the only way I could see maybe marriage being fundamentally reimagined, is if we divested it from romance and said it's just about empire building. But even then, what does that say about capitalism? Who gets to build an empire and who gets to service the empire?
Yes. And to the answer, yes, let's form a commune and let's form an empire together. But it's almost like
sorry,
turtles
can I just
over
also
turtles
add
all
that
the way down. Because the
exactly.
ultimate answer is
I
why
think
can't
that
we do it on our own?
why can't we do it on our own? Exactly. Because to do it on your own is to give up. Oh, I've given up on love. When actually, as well, one of the things that, firstly, most women know that the deepest love comes from their friends. Those are the people who truly witness you, who support you, who are there through everything. And two, be married long enough and you'll know that love isn't enough. And also that you change. How you feel about yourself at 25, at 30, at 35 even, it's very different to how you feel about yourself at 40, 45, 50 and beyond. What you want from your life should always evolve and be adventurous. You don't settle for being someone else's carer. Oh no, sorry, take that out because that's different obviously in certain scenarios. Don't settle for being the one who facilitates someone else's adventures.
All right.
And if you
I
are
have
listening to
go.
this and you're married and you want to... Oh, can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
If you're listening to this and you are married, but it is stoking some little suspicion in you, and that suspicion may have already fanned itself into a massive bonfire and you feel like this is just throwing more kindling on it, then listen to it. You don't owe your life to anybody. You don't owe your happiness to anyone. You don't have to worry about what society will think of you. You only have a responsibility to yourself. And something that I always say to women that I will leave you with now is whatever your life looks like now, go back to that 16-year-old girl that you used to be and tell her what it looks like. Tell her how things are. Tell her what her husband is like. And if you in any way don't feel proud to share that news with her, if you feel sad, if you feel embarrassed, if you want to grab her by the arms and scream at her to run, then want that for yourself too, because there is still enough time for you to save her.
Speechless. That's amazing and so true. I can't thank you enough for your passion and for your research and for your book. I wish I had this book 2 years ago, but it didn't matter because your IG stories helped me so much anyway. But I do have to run, but I just wanted to, I'm blown away by your work. And thank you so much for all the future women on behalf of them for your work.
Well, I want to say thank you to you as well for being so passionate about this book and for being one of the first people to reach out and ask for me to do a podcast episode with you. That means a lot to me. And I really love how beautifully and deeply you've engaged with the work as well. And I'm also I've got so much admiration for you doing it, like leaving and showing other women how it can be done, and that there is not just life after divorce, but there is thriving after divorce. There is life after divorce in the sense that pre-divorce, your life was being sucked out of you and now it's back. And so I want to thank you and congratulate you and say that I'm so glad that you're happy and that you've recognized that you deserve that.
Oh, I wish I could hug you. Okay. My ex will be like, "Where are you?
I'll let you run off. I'm sorry. I
Okay.
talked at you for so long. That's going to be such a hard edit to make it make sense.
It's so enormous, everything that you're doing and talking about. It's overwhelming, but please have an amazing day, and I will email you when everything's all edited and up and ready to go.
Let me just take a picture of us doing this pod. Hang on, with my book. With my book there.
Yeah.
Balanced on the top. Here we go. God, I just There we go. Right. Wait. Okay.
Thank you so much. You're amazing.
You're amazing.
I really appreciate it. And thanks for being so understanding. All right. You're in Brisbane, right?
Yeah.
Are you in Brisbane?
Yeah. Gold Coast.
Okay. So you're coming to the launch, and then we're going to go and have drinks afterwards.
I would love to. Let's do it.
So get the night off.
I will.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Bye, Megan. Is it Megan or Megan?
Megan.
Oh, Megan. Okay, great.